Hi guys, Brian here from Slick Games and welcome to devlog number 2 for Alien the Alien. Okay, so in the last devlog we spoke about what made me make the game in the first place and how I got started, a bit about the history about Alien the Alien. In this devlog, I want to talk about the progress made on the new game so far. We're going to go through the various different mechanics in the game and also the progress made with things like the user interface and the sort of secondary stuff around all that. So let's get started. So as I mentioned in the previous game, the idea of Alien the Alien is to progress through the levels and get into the portal in order to get to the next level. Being an infinite moving puzzle type game, obviously to do this the player needs to bump into things to navigate through the level. If the player flies off the screen, then the level resets, but the time doesn't. Of course the user can choose to restart the level if they want to, and that will reset the time. The most simple object in the game is the standard block. This is simply a static object that stops the player's movement when they hit it. Originally it was just a very boring looking square. I have actually changed the art now so that it's got some lights and things on it and different corners. It actually randomises the appearance for each and every block, which is kind of nice. I actually wrote a block of code that allows me to change the faces of the block and assign lights to each one. And that allows me to very quickly generate different looking blocks. However, at the moment there's only the single standard face. So most of the collision detection in Alien the Alien is pretty straightforward, or at least it was initially. It simply detects when a collision occurs between the player and an object, and when that happens the player stops moving. Unfortunately, I actually had a load of issues with touch input on this, and of course being as I want this to be a mobile game, that was unacceptable. What was happening was when the player hit an object he would remain stationary, but as he moved away from that object he'd effectively scrape along the side of the object, meaning that he would stop instantly because a collision had been detected. So to get away from that I tried all sorts of different things like disabling the collision areas until he moved again, and all loads of stuff. It didn't work. I ended up making it so that the collision box on the player was actually 1 pixel smaller than the player's object itself, and when he hits an object it repositions the player based on the direction that they were travelling when the collision occurred. And this works perfectly. It means that my swipe gestures on mobile now actually work nice and smooth. The second most basic object in the game is the angle. I mean, I say it's basic. It's the second object you come across in the game. The actual code to do this is actually quite tricky because I need to make it so that the player remains in line. Now, obviously, if you hit an object and just bounce straight off of it, the player would move anywhere up to half a tile in the direction that the angle was facing, right? So they'd hit one edge of it and they'd bounce off and they wouldn't be in line with that object anymore. And that's obviously fine for some games, but when you're trying to make a puzzle game that's based on very accurate positioning, it doesn't work. So to get around it, I had to create the angle as an area 2D collision. So it doesn't think there's a physical object there, but when the player enters into that area 2D, if they're hitting it from the flat sides, then it triggers the I've hit a static object block of code. And if they hit it from the angled side, it goes through a load of checks and rotation code that allows me to position the player in line with the angle as they exit from it. It works perfectly, and I've actually got loads of code in place to allow for the speed that the player is travelling at, so the motion looks fairly fluid. Well, I think it does anyway. It has caused a load of bugs. If I put two angles right next to each other and the player is moving slowly, Alan goes completely mental, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I haven't worked that out yet, but I've just got around it by fixing my level design so I didn't have two angles directly next to each other. And you know, it works fine. So at the moment, that's how it is. It also became slightly more complicated because I wanted to use the same object for multiple times and just rotate the object. So effectively, you've got an angle that points, you know, top left, bottom right, etc., etc. But it's all the same block, which is fine in theory. But I have to work out which way the player is travelling. I have to work out the rotation of the angle, and then work out which side they've hit, and apply the transformations accordingly. The code for it's a bit of a well, yeah. I mean, you can see it's a big long switch effectively. I'm not massively happy with the code, but it works, and it works fairly well. So for the moment, this is going to be how it is. The next mechanic is the teleport. These are fairly simple. They have to be placed in pairs, with each teleport referencing the other one. When the player enters the collision area, he is simply repositioned at the location of the other teleport. And to stop the player from instantly triggering another teleportation, I set a flag on entry of the first teleport that is then unset when the player exits the second teleport. So as they enter from the bottom of teleport number 1, they exit at the top of teleport number 2. Gates are one object, but they're actually made up of two kinematic bodies, which are the doors, and a trigger area, which exists in between the doors. When the player passes through the trigger area, the area is disabled, and the doors animate to the closed position. Asteroids are one-time destructible blocks. So when the player bumps into one of these, he stops moving, but the asteroid is destroyed in a nice sort of explosion effect that I'm quite pleased with. These were originally set up as rigid body objects, which allowed me to play around with the physics of the object, but sadly it didn't work with my custom scaling. Rigid bodies, you have to scale the sprite and the collision area and not the object itself. If you try and scale the object itself, it just resets it back to scale 1. And that produced some awful, awful bugs. To get around this, my new destructible blocks, the asteroids, are kinematic objects. Are they static objects? No, I was right. They are kinematic objects, and initially, so they basically sit there and spin slowly. When the player hits the object, that kinematic body is hidden, and it spawns the fragments, which are rigid body objects, and the fragments themselves have the scaling set that the main object has. So if the asteroid had been scaled down to, I don't know, 80% size, for example, then all of the little fragments are 80% of the size that they would have been, if the asteroid was full size. And I think the effect works quite well. It also means that I can bounce the little asteroid fragments off of other objects, which is kind of nice. So these are the 5 core object types that are currently present in Alien the Alien. I'm currently in the process of experimenting with another couple of objects. Turrets, for example, are a new addition to the game. I haven't actually created any proper levels with them yet. They work by turning towards the player as the player enters their range. So you can see the area of effect that they have. The player enters this area of effect and the turret starts firing and turning towards the player. At the moment, Alan can withstand a couple of direct hits before he explodes and the level resets. I'm hoping to extend this mechanic to let the player upgrade their ship and have more hit points at some point in the future. Buttons are a fairly simple block with one noticeable difference. Well, two noticeable differences. First of all, the artwork is not finished, obviously, and the second one is this coloured side on one side of the block. When you hit that side, it triggers the temporary deactivation of any linked turrets. And to show which turrets are linked to which button, the detection zone for the turret is coloured in the same shade of colour as the button itself. But the artwork for these, like I say, needs to be redone, and the gates and the teleports actually. And in fact, the artwork for Alan himself needs to be redone. But at the moment, it works, and I'm experimenting with how I can create levels with these. So that really only leaves the user interface. Initially, the player will choose a save slot into which all their progress is stored. I wanted to have multiple slots so that more than one player can enjoy the game from a single device. So if you've got kids, this sort of feature is for you. I have kids. Once the slot's chosen, you can select a difficulty level. I'm going to add a description for each of these. At the moment, most of the changes revolve around how long you have to complete a level and how many stars are required to unlock new levels. From early feedback, I may be adding a different type of game mode into it because the game feels a little bit rushed at the moment. You're effectively rewarded for blitzing levels as quickly as possible, and that's not ideal. Next up is the level select screen. Though this will change if it's a newly created save slot, so I'm going to put in some sort of an intro and then the game will launch into the first level. I don't really want to have too much reading in the game. I want the user to experience the mechanics of the blocks, for example, gradually and be forced to get used to how they work and what they do. But I do want to put some sort of an introduction to the game. So that's what will happen with a new save slot. The levels themselves will always scale to fit the device. It calculates the size of the level based off of the grid and then scales and recenters accordingly. This scaling method also affects the player's acceleration and top speed, so that smaller screen devices don't have an advantage in terms of time to complete a level. I'm also intending to integrate adverts. I have already put some in. I hope they're not going to be too annoying. I'm also intending to explore in-app purchases so that you can pay to remove them. I mean, I can't imagine that this game's going to make me very much money, and that's not the reason I'm making it anyway, but it would be nice to make a little bit. And that's basically the progress on the game so far. So yeah, if you've liked this video, then please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content. I've got some sounds in the game, but no music or anything like that, and I'm going to be addressing that in the very next devlog, so hopefully I will see you then. Thanks very much for watching.